So my persuasive argument will be on whether or not life begins at conception. So the question you guys should be asking yourselves is, what is conception? What does it really mean? And conception means occurs when the sperm cell of a man goes up into the woman's vagina, and it joins in with the woman's egg, and thus begins the the beginning of the fetus. And is the fetus considered also along with the with conception? The answer is yes and no. No, because the fetus is the beginning process of the conception, but conception begins when the sperm and the egg meet, and so it begins the life of the fetus. And the fetus is ultimately a life form. And in biblical teachings, it's also seen that life is created through God's image and likeness. In the beginning of Genesis, chapter 3, it's when God created Adam and Eve, and it shows that their purpose in life is, but it's also the story of where did they come from and where did they go. And it begins that whole journey of how man is seeking the higher being, but also who they are called to be. And in the chapter 3, it's the fall of man and woman alike, and how they discover who they are and why they are meant to be, and like just understanding what they are and how they have sinned against God, and then thus they are to believe that they are not as equal as God anymore. And so in religious teachings, it also symbolizes that as man opens their eyes to the world and thus has to be in survival mode for most of the time. And in more recent terms, a book that I've read that talks about the meaning of life is The Last Man, which is a novel about this man who's the only person who can, with a Y chromosome that's left on the planet, because there is a plague that happened where it killed off all the Y chromosomes in a man. And so he's discovering who he is as a person, but why he's important. Because in the beginning of the story, he's just a normal person living his boring life, but he's not productive into the world. He doesn't contribute anything, and thus he thinks his life is worthless until the plague hits, and now he's the only man that is important, and his goal is to repopulate the world, and he tries to do so, but at the same time he's also brought into challenges, whether it's the desire of sex or masturbation, because he doesn't know why this is to be, and so he also seeks a higher being and why he's the last one, because he doesn't believe in himself that he can be the one that's chosen to this. And so he starts having these contemplations of why his life matters and whether or not he should be the one to reproduce life. And so the question also becomes clear in this book is, why isn't cloning existing? And just as it is in the book, as it is now, cloning will never work, because in order to create a clone you need a Y chromosome, and whether or not biology allows it or not, the Y chromosome is always important, regardless if it's a male or a female. You still need that chromosome to reproduce life, and without it you can't create life. And thus we learn in the story that that's how people are made, and have to accept the fact that it's true. It's a true teaching. And thus it brings conflict into the story, because now he's also feeling the side effects of the plague, now his life is more desirable, and he has to understand whether or not he has to repopulate the world. And it's like a reality check for him, but at the same time he can't do as much as he could because he's already affected with the illness. And so now he's in a bigger challenge. This also relates to now, because when the author wanted to write the story, he wanted it to write it in modern times with modern politics, and how our society is losing its generation. And he wanted to tell this story as a wake-up call, because he wanted to show that we can't just leave life as it is. We have to continue the process of reproducing it, because if we don't reproduce it, we're going to die off, just like in the story, in the ending, which results to the generation dying off, because he dies in the process of the plague. And to be specific and using scientific terms, life is the criteria of when the fusion of the sperm meets the egg. And so it's through the process of the sperm and the egg, which is called fusion, through the gametes, and is also seen as a scientific term in biology because gametes is what creates the DNA, and it's like the building tool of how each human individual is unique in its own being. And it's also important to think about how we are all unique and also have challenges and effects to how we are as a person in its own effect. And what in a court case I actually spoke into that caught my attention was Planned Parenthood versus Rounds, which was a court case that was fought against the United States against Planned Parenthood, because what happened was Planned Parenthood wasn't being truthful to their patients, and so they wouldn't tell their patients what abortion was leading them to, which led to a higher risk in suicide towards the mothers, because they were realizing that what abortion was killing the fetus, and in other cases life. And so Planned Parenthood was hiding this truth from their patients, and thus they were losing their credibility. And so what the court said, that you had to tell your patients what they were doing was wrong, that they were killing a human life, and Planned Parenthood wanted to reject that truth, and so thus the court ruled in favor of Rounds, saying that leading the plaintiff as decided that the decision against Planned Parenthood because they didn't have the solid evidence to prove their case correct. And based on the criteria of fusion in scientific terms, that when the sperm and the egg meet, the zygote is the cell embryo that makes rapid events happen in our life, that builds onto our being with the arms and the legs and the face and our structural being, and thus it's how life is began through the littlest seconds, as it's said in the quote you see above, that life begins in milliseconds, and not just with regular time, it's in slower time or with a faster speed that we are able to comprehend.